stories featured in Greeking Out are original adaptations of classic Greek myths. This week's story features more murder on more islands, a boxing match, lots of different scary birds, more trials of leadership, an abundance of Arguses, and magnificent hair.
Welcome back to Greeking Out. Today, we are continuing along on Jason's quest for the Golden Fleece, accompanied, of course, by his amazing crew of Argonauts.
At this point, not all of the original Argonauts are still part of the crew.
That's right, Oracle. There was a little issue and someone may have been left behind.
It was Heracles.
Yeah, if you remember in the last episode, Heracles had to leave the Argonauts in their quest to continue on his own journey.
Heracles was compelled by Hera to complete 12 labors in order to find redemption and be welcomed on Olympus.
Exactly. And at this point, the Argo and its crew had made it all the way to northern Anatolia in modern-day Turkey. And once more, our intrepid heroes stopped on an island to stretch their legs and get supplies. Honestly, I kind of think of this as like one big road trip across the world, and all the stops they were making were like, stopping at a gas station to get snacks and to meet kings and get in fights. Well, it's not a perfect analogy, but you get the idea. Anyway, they had arrived in the country of a people called the Beercanians. Up until now, the Argonauts had been pretty much welcomed everywhere they stopped, so they were a little surprised to see a full army marching towards them on the beach, with spears at the ready and bows drawn.
Greetings,
Jason said nervously.
I'm Jason, and these are my comrades, and we sail aboard that big ship over there called the Argo. We mean you no harm. We simply wish to stop and gather fresh water and supplies. We'll be out of your hair really quickly, so, no need for those sharp spears or arrows.
None of the soldiers replied, but they halted their advance a few paces away from where the Argonauts had collected on the beach. A large man marched forward through the ranks of the soldiers before him. He was a tall and brawny man with wild hair and a wild beard. He had on no shirt, and he didn't appear to be carrying any weapons. Still, his fists clenched and unclenched as he stomped towards the visitors on the beach. The energy he was bringing to this conversation was not very encouraging, and the Argonauts wished that Heracles was here to receive this fearsome greeting.
I am Amycos,
the man snarled.
I am king of the Beercanians and son of the great god Poseidon. You are trespassing on our beach, and so, like all of the others before you, you must pay the toll.
Okay,
Jason replied.
How much do we owe you? I mean, we don't have a lot of gold on hand, but we'd be happy to trade. And maybe if you'd be willing to take an IOU, we could actually work out...
The ring!
Amycos interrupted.
Well, we don't have any rings to offer. We're not really fans of that kind of jewelry, but if you...
Not that kind of a ring, you fool. The boxing ring. You must choose a champion to stand alone against me in combat. No weapons, only fists, strength, and strategy.
The Argonauts looked around at each other. I mean, they were all decent fighters, but this guy was huge. Could anyone but Heracles even stand a chance against him one-on-one with no weapons?
So any volunteers?
Jason asked the crew. There was a long, uncomfortable silence before a voice called out from the back.
I got this.
It was Polydeuces, who had joined the crew along with his twin brother Castor. They were the brothers of Clytemnestra and Helen, and even though they were born on the same day, only Polydeuces was technically a demigod, as Zeus was his father, but the king of Sparta, Tyndareus, was Castor's father.
Together, Castor and Polydeuces were known as the Dioscuri.
Polydeuces took a moment to size up King Amycus. The man was bigger, taller, and probably would try to fight dirty, but Polydeuces was clever and started to see a weakness. He threw a knowing glance at his brother.
I'm a son of Zeus,
Polydeuces said.
I definitely got this.
So Polydeuces entered the boxing ring with the king of the Beercanians. The hometown crowd cheered for their king and mocked the Argonaut as the two men began their match. King Amycus came out swinging, which is exactly what Polydeuces expected. He saw the arrogant confidence in the man's eyes, and he realized that King Amycus had probably never really been challenged before. He was the kind of fighter who attacked hard and fast and beat his opponents quickly. So Polydeuces used his quickness instead, and only responded with small punches at first, making the burly king tire as he chased him around the ring. Amycus roared in frustration as Polydeuces dodged and ducked, swing after swing, over and over again. The king was wearing out. His breathing was heavy, and his punches were coming slower and slower. Polydeuces saw his moment, and he took it. Without waiting, the Argonaut moved in and attacked. He began to hit harder and faster than anyone, even the other Greeks, thought possible. King Amycus tried to block the punches, but he was too tired and too slow. Eventually, one strong punch from Polydeuces was all it took, and the king crumpled to the ground, fatally defeated. The crowd fell into a stunned silence for just a moment. And then the Argonauts let out a cheer and rushed to Polydeuces. He had done the impossible. He had won.
This strategy in boxing of tiring out your opponent and attacking once they are tired is a time-honored tradition. Muhammad Ali was famous for his rope-a-dope technique that used this strategy.
The Beercanians were not as excited about Polydeuces' victory as the Argonauts, and once they saw that their king had been fatally injured, they were enraged. Suddenly, they were attacking the Argonauts for killing their king.
This does not make sense.
Oh, yeah?
The implied purpose of the contest was for the Argonauts to fight for the right to stop on the island. If the Beercanians were not prepared for the possibility of the Argonauts winning, why have the contest at all?
Well, that's a really good question. Maybe the Beercanians never thought that a boxing match could end in death, but when you're challenging complete strangers, you gotta know that's a possibility. But logical or not, the fight turned into a great battle. And at this point, the Argonauts had been in many fights, so they were eventually able to defeat the Beercanians. Still, they wasted no time in getting back to their ship and setting sail again. They left victorious, but they still felt like they had lost something.
Perhaps they were feeling regret because every time they stop somewhere, they wind up killing someone.
Yeah, that could be part of it. I mean, even in Polydeuces' moment of glory, some Argonauts still sighed over the absence of Heracles. They still had a long way to go and lots of stops to make. I mean, was this journey going to keep becoming increasingly murdery, you know? Well, when they made landfall again a few days later, Jason and all of his men were extremely cautious. They were on a lush island, and they could hear the sound of rushing water nearby. As they trekked along a small path through the forest, they couldn't help noticing a certain smell, and it wasn't a pleasant one.
Seriously, you guys?
Jason said accusingly.
At least move to the back of the line if you're gonna let one go. Sheesh. My mouth was open and everything, man. Come on.
I don't think that's what we're smelling, Orpheus suggested.
This is so bad it can't possibly be human.
They kept marching until they came to a large clearing, and in the clearing was a small hut with a magnificent banquet set on a table out front. There were fruits and delectables of all kinds, roast pork, cooked chicken, a whole side of beef, still warm from the fire, and the Argonauts could barely contain themselves. They ran over to the table, but as they got closer, the smell got worse. A lot worse. It smelled like a dirty diaper filled with spoiled food and rolled around in an ashtray, only more disgusting. Suddenly, nobody was hungry anymore.
I am very grateful that I do not have a sense of smell. Your description makes it sound terrible.
It was terrible. And after the Argonauts recovered, they noticed a man sitting at the far end of this table.
Hey, who's that?
One of the Argonauts piped up. He was a scrawny old man, wearing a battered, colorful tunic that was probably fancy at one time or another, but now it was a grimy mess, much like the man who was wearing it.
Who said that?
The man squeaked.
Do I hear, soldiers? Has the prophecy finally come true? Do you seek the Golden Fleece?
Jason nodded, and then, seeing that the man was probably blind, spoke up.
Yes, we are looking for the Golden Fleece. I knew it! The prophecy has finally come to pass!
The man said. Suddenly, this old man seemed overjoyed. He explained that his name was Phineas and that he had been cursed by Zeus. Apollo had given him the power to deliver prophecies, and he was good at it. But there's a reason that other prophets and seers told the future in a convoluted way. The gods don't like to have their plans spelled out to mortals, and Phineas was being a little too accurate. So one day, Zeus had struck him blind as a punishment. But the king of the gods didn't stop there. He also assigned 4 harpies the task of torturing Phineas.
Harpies were a part bird, part woman hybrid monster in Greek mythology. They were sometimes known as the Hounds of Zeus and were associated with storm winds and punishment. Zeus was known to send them out to do his bidding.
And they certainly had a creative form of torture in mind. Every day, an amazing feast would appear on this table. And every day, as soon as Phineas approached, the harpies would swoop down and steal the food, slashing at the blind man with their claws if he dared approach. And then, after the harpies had eaten their fill, instead of just leaving when their bellies were full, these harpies left behind a terrible stench, so foul and overwhelming that the food was practically inedible. Poor Phineas would force himself to take a bite or two, and then he would have to walk away from the feast, doing everything he could not to retch right there on the spot. But fortunately, Phineas knew that this punishment wasn't forever. He knew of a prophecy that said he would be rescued by heroes in search of a golden fleece.
Are you here to rescue me?
He said with a laugh.
Well, of course we'll help you,
Jason said, feeling obligated to help.
I mean, we can totally take out some farting monsters.
Then he turned to his men nervously.
Right, guys? Right? We can do that, right?
The crew just rolled their eyes and prepared for the harpies to return. Again, this wasn't exactly the behavior of a leader. And with that, I think this is a good place for a commercial break. Not that there's ever really a good place for a commercial break, but if there was to be a good place, this would probably be it. Anyway, we'll be back in a little bit. Just take a break. And now we continue Greeking out with National Geographic Kids. Now, this story particularly features 2 of the Argonauts, Callias and Zetes. They were collectively known as the Boreads because they were the twin sons of the god Boreas.
The Greek god Boreas was the god of the north wind, known for bringing the cold, but also known for his hair that was frozen into pointy pieces.
And maybe the Boreads were feeling the pressure to do something heroic because the other twins on the trip, Castor and Polydeuces, had really just shown off the other day in the fight with the Beercaneans, but these twins could do something no one else on board the Argo could do. They could fly.
In most versions of the story, the Boreads had wings, but in at least one version, they had long, majestic hair that helped them fly.
Yeah, I prefer to think they had both. And as they sprung into action to fight off the harpies from Phineas' feast, their beautiful long hair and their wings flapped in the wind. Terrified and probably in awe of the Boreads and their awesome hair, the harpies took off with one last fart And Callias and Zetes gave chase, and the harpies shrieked in fear as the two winged warriors pursued them through the air. The bird creatures had not been expecting to be challenged in the air today, and these harpies flew faster and faster, but the flying twins kept up, and in a short time, the two brothers drew their swords to strike the harpies down out of the air. Before they could strike, however, Callias and Zetes were blinded by a bright light. Something bright appeared in the sky in front of them, and the brothers were forced to stop in their pursuit. Squinting into the light, they saw something very unexpected. The goddess Iris appeared before them, floating in the air, buoyed by her own fantastic golden wings. She was wrapped in a cloak of colors and held a majestic-looking pitcher in one hand.
Iris literally means rainbow. In ancient Greek, she replenished the clouds with water from the sea after a storm. She was a messenger to the gods, particularly to Hera.
You have completed your task,
she said to the twins.
You may return to Phineas and tell him the harpies will torment him no further. But in the name of Zeus, I command you to sheath your swords and bring no harm to these creatures. They were simply following the bidding of Zeus.
Well, that kind of took the wind out of the Boread's hair, so to speak, but they returned to the Argo triumphant. They let Phineas, Jason, and the rest of the Argonauts know what Iris had said and delivered the news that Phineas had been freed from his punishment.
Other sources say that the Boreads died while chasing the harpies. In some versions, they were fated to perish if they couldn't catch something they pursued.
Yeah, there are a lot of versions of this story, and clearly we decided to go with the happier route. So when this news was delivered, there was a great feast. An actual feast. Finally, poor Phineas could eat. He decided to repay the Argonauts by giving them some crucial advice about their voyage ahead. To continue on their journey to Colchis, the Argo would have to traverse some rough and dangerous waters. The most perilous part was a strait, a little bit of water that went between two giant rocks that clashed together like teeth, crushing ships to bits. These terrible rock jaws were known as the Simplades, and no ship ever made it through.
Simplades literally means crashing together. So, these rocks were accurately named.
Take this bird with you on your journey,
Phineas said, and he presented Jason with a small dove in a cage.
Release the bird as soon as you reach the crashing rocks. Then follow it immediately with as much haste as you can.
But what if the bird dies? Phineas merely looked at Jason.
Then turn around.
So basically what Phineas was saying was that the bird would sort of serve as an oracle of whether or not the Argo would be able to get through the crashing rocks. The Argonauts set off, and, just as Phineas said, when they reached the Simplades, the ocean was turbulent and the rocks were a-smashing. As they released the bird, the whole crew of the Argo watched with rapt attention. Turning around wasn't really an option, so this had to work. The bird had to make it through. The bird flew fast and far, straight into the gap between the Simplades. The two rocks smashed together, and everyone held their breath to see if the bird had survived. And when they saw the bird flying free on the other side, a single feather stuck between the rocks, the crew rowed to follow immediately, just in case the gods had changed their mind about letting them through. But with all the heroes of the age on one boat, rowing together, they pulled through with just a little bit of the stern broken off at the end.
Some versions of the story say that Athena helped the Argonauts by pushing the ship through with her divine hand.
Well, hey, whatever works. So the Argo sailed on with a slightly tattered backside, but otherwise intact. And after a few weeks at sea, the crew of the Argo found themselves approaching the shores of the island of Ares.
I would like to point out that we are skipping over a few adventures in the interest of time.
Right, exactly. I mean, this episode is long enough as it is, right? Jason and the Argonauts stopped a bunch of places. They had a whole bunch of different adventures, but we gotta get moving, and hey, that's just fodder for future Greeking Out episodes, right? So, once again, the crew decided to disembark on this island and have a look around. As Jason and his team were exploring the beach, they heard a terrible screeching sound. They looked up, and they saw a ferocious-looking bird swooping down at them. Now, this would be scary enough as it is, but it didn't help that these giant birds also had giant feathers that were razor-sharp and could cut through flesh. The Argonauts threw themselves face down in the sand just in time, and when the birds flew away, they ran for cover in the nearby trees. The screeching sound of their cries got louder and louder, and in a few seconds, the sky was full of these vicious birds. They dived and squawked, scanning the beach, but the warriors were now too well hidden, and the birds landed back in the trees, watching and waiting, which was kind of a problem. The Argonauts couldn't hide forever, but they knew that if they went out in the open, these birds would chase them down. The men looked to Jason for an answer. He was their captain. He must have some sort of a plan, right? Jason's face was a complete blank. He thought long and he thought hard to come up with a plan, but in the end,
I got nothing. Anybody have any ideas?
Of course, the crew began to grumble. If Heracles was here, he'd know what to do, they all thought. Even Jason was thinking this very same thing.
Heracles, that's it!
One of the men spoke up.
Didn't he tell us about how he had faced birds just like this one time? I think he made some kind of a noise to scare the birds out of the trees, and then he shot them down out of the sky, right?
In Heracles' 6th labor, the hero was tasked with killing the Stymphalian birds. He used a noisemaker to scare the birds from their nests so he could use his bow and defeat them.
And so that's exactly what Jason and his men did. Some of the men ran through the forest, whooping and hollering, while the others stood just inside of the tree line with their bows and arrows ready. The birds launched themselves into the air, not sure what the noise was, and the archers shot them down one by one. Once the birds figured out what was going on, they escaped and flew away to cliffs, all the way at the end of the world. Jason and his friends celebrated while making their way back to the beach. Once there, they were greeted by an unexpected audience. 4 well-groomed men emerged from the tree line on the other side of the beach and were clapping loudly for the Argonauts.
Well done!
One of the men shouted.
Those birds have been tormenting us for weeks. They even destroyed our ship.
Shortly, the strangers made their way over to the Argonauts and introduced themselves.
I am Argus of Colchis.
The tallest man said, hold on, wait. Argus? Wait, hold on. Isn't Argus the guy who built the boat, the ship, the Argo? He's back?
This is not the same Argus. This is an additional Argus.
Okay, I feel like there are plenty of names out there to use. We don't have to use the same one in the same story, but whatever. Anyway, Argus number 2 says that...
Argus number 4.
4? What? What do you mean? We have the shipbuilder, and then...
You are forgetting Argus, Odysseus's faithful dog, who waits for him for 20 years.
Oh, right. Yes, he was truly the best of the Arguses. Good, Argus.
And Argus Panoptes, the many-eyed giant who watched over Io.
Right. So, okay, we are on Argus number 4. Wow. Okay. So, anyway, Argus number 4 says,
I am a son of Phrixus, and these are my brothers. We were on a journey to claim our birthright and take back our kingdom, but our ship broke apart before we could get there.
My name is Jason,
the captain replied, and we are...
Wait a second, did you say you were from Colchis? As in, Colchis ruled by King Aeetes with the Golden Fleece, Colchis? And your father was Phrixus, the guy who rode the flying ram that became the Golden Fleece?
As it turns out, it was the same Colchis. Not really a surprise. I mean, how many Colchises could there possibly be?
Lots of people in Greek mythology have the same name.
Okay, yeah, well, clearly you're right, but in this case, it was the same Colchis. Argus and his brothers were actually traveling away from there, trying to recover their father's kingdom, but without a ship, they weren't going anywhere. If this quest sounds familiar, it's basically the same quest Jason is on, but going the geographically opposite direction. When Jason told them of his quest for the Golden Fleece, Argus number 4 offered to help.
Aedes is a ruthless and clever king, and the Golden Fleece is his prized possession. He will do anything he can to stop you from getting it, but my brothers and I can at least help you get there.
So that is how the Argo gained a few more crew members. More importantly, these new Argonauts were willing to guide Jason and his crew to Colchis, King Aedes' stronghold and the home of the legendary Golden Fleece. I think we can all agree that they really needed a guide, and the brothers needed a ship, so they set sail for Colchis together. And after many mishaps and detours and pit stops, the Argonauts finally made it to Colchis.
Thank you for listening. The Argonautica continues next episode.
Breaking out, gods and heroes, amazing feats. Listen and you'll see it's breaking out.
This episode of National Geographic Kids Greeking Out is written by Jillian Hughes and Kenny Curtis, and hosted by Kenny Curtis, with Tori Kerr as the Oracle of Wifi. Audio production and sound design by Scotty Beam, and our theme song was composed by Parry Gripp. Dr. Meredith Safran is our subject matter expert, Emily Gamin and Lorri Broda are our producers, and Emily Everhart is our senior producer.